Hello everyone, it's Angelika Kargulewicz, clinical nutritionist, and today we will talk about diabetes and food products which are advisable for people who suffer from diabetes. Taking care of normal glycemia is the main goal of people dealing with diabetes, and diet and its components affect directly the glycemic control. But very often there is a talk about food products that should not be eaten by diabetics. But today, conversely, we will focus on food products with desirable effects. First of all, I would love to mention chicory, asparagus and onions, but also those vegetables which are low in starch. For example, tomato, cucumber, pepper, lettuce, spinach, but also courgette. They should be a staple of diabetics' diet. But why especially chicory, asparagus and onions? Because they contain inulin, which is a polysaccharide with prebiotic properties which nourishes the beneficial bacteria in the human intestinal tract. For example, inulin has been shown to increase the amount of the protective bacterium Akkermansia mucinifila. Inulin improves glucose tolerance and also lipid profile parameters. Naturally, inulin can be taken in its pure form, but then the amount must be careful because the dose greater than 14 grams per day can cause gastrointestinal discomfort like flatulence, bloating, or even diarrhea. However, it is worth bearing in mind natural sources of the inulin. In addition to chicory, asparagus and onions, inulin can also be found in tomatoes and, for example, in oatmeal. But in diabetic patients, it is worth to mention that oatmeal should be eaten as unprocessed oat flakes. And also, it is worth to mention that inulin can be also found in Jerusalem artichoke. Advisable food products for people with diabetes are also fermented vegetables like pickles and also sauerkraut. And it is worth to mention kimchi, which is a fermented Chinese cabbage with additional ingredients like garlic, onions, but also pepper, radish, ginger, and also fermented fish sauce and starch syrup. Kimchi, in addition to live bacterial cultures like Lactobacillus plantarum or Lactobacillus brevis, also contains dietary fiber, minerals, vitamins, glucosinolates, but also polyphenols with beneficial effects on carbohydrate metabolism. Studies show that taking kimchi in a dose of 180 grams per day for 8 weeks reduces the concentration of glycated hemoglobin, also reduces the insulin concentration, but also improves the insulin resistance index and pancreatic islet beta cell function. Let's not forget about seeds with different fractions of dietary fiber. For example, plantago ovata and psyllium, but also flax seeds and chia seeds. They contain fiber which stabilizes the blood serum glucose levels. For example, plantago ovata husks contain soluble fiber fractions, so-called mucilage fractions, which slows down the absorption of the glucose in the intestinal tract and also delays gastric emptying, thus influencing lower serum glucose levels. Let's not forget about olive oil, especially unrefined extra virgin olive oil, which contains so-called hydroxytyrosol, which reduces the obesity, inflammation, but also reduces hyperglycemia and also insulin resistance. And when we talk about healthy fats, we should also remember about avocado. Avocado is a very good option for people with diabetes because it contains very healthy fatty acids, but also potassium and dietary fiber. A very good ingredient in drinks and dishes is also Ceylon cinnamon, especially for people with diabetes. One study showed that the consumption of 1 to 6 grams of the cinnamon for 40 days by patients with type 2 diabetes resulted in a reduction of glucose levels and triglycerides levels, and it was also able to regulate other lipid profile parameters. Another study also showed that cinnamon reduces the insulin resistance index. When it comes to seeds, let's not forget about fenugreek seeds. They contain a number of valuable substances, amongst others disogenin, which supports the function of the beta cells of the pancreatic islets, which are responsible for the production of the insulin. Furthermore, it also displays a desirable antioxidant effects. Fenugreek is also a valuable source of dietary fiber, both soluble, so-called jar fiber, and also insoluble lignins. And in fact, the consumption of the fenugreek seeds lowers the glucose fasting, but also lowers the serum concentration of glucose 2 hours after the meal. And overall, it is an effect of the improved insulin resistance index. Another recommended food product for people with diabetes is bitter melon, aka bitter cucumber. It is a beneficial plant with many bioactive substances, for example like carotene. It can be consumed boiled or fried, and bitter melon has a well-documented glucose-lowering effects. 200 to 250 grams per day of bitter melon for patients with type 2 diabetes for several weeks improves glucose tolerance. But of course, it is difficult in some countries to find bitter melon in the shop. But alternatively, we can use, for example, courgette or squash, which might not have such a beneficial effect on glycemia as bitter melon, but it is certainly a good option for diabetics. And let's not forget to incorporate in a daily diet complete protein, because it stimulates the sensation of the satiety, and at the same time it assures the proper and normal glycemia. It is good to choose white meat, like for example good quality turkey, but also chicken, and also steamed or stewed fish eaten without the skin. But also a good option is egg, especially eaten soft boiled. And for those who tolerate legumes, it is good to choose chickpeas, beans and lentils. And let's not forget about spices like nigella seeds, but also garlic, turmeric and ginger. They possess so-called hypoglycemic properties. In conclusion, naturally, living with diabetes and keeping the glucose levels within normal levels is not only about eating miracle food products, but let's not forget about general health promoting and active lifestyle, including physical activity. Physical activity has an enormous effect on the health of people with diabetes, and even if it does not lead to a body reduction, in the long term it has a beneficial effect on our organism. It sensitizes our brain to signals indicating satiety, and therefore in the long term reduces the risk of overeating. And of course, on a daily basis, let's remember to make right nutritional choices like eating vegetables, pickles, valuable seeds, but also valuable fats like olive oil and avocado, and also don't forget about wholesome protein. Thank you very much for watching my video. If you like it, please leave the thumbs up, and also don't forget to subscribe the channel. See you soon in the next episode.